Welcome to Chapter 14 on logistics. There have been some very serious changes in logistics in recent years. One of the biggest changes is the advent of more and more megaships, resulting in fewer vessels, but more freight. And it's also worth noting that there's more freight and fewer ports, which in turn has resulted in pretty serious congestion at the ports. A couple of other noteworthy changes, a few of them talked about in your chapter. One being containerization, which is the move towards putting products in containers to protect them. In the background, you can see a local manufacturing organization, and I'm not going to mention the name of it because it makes my point rather well about the importance of containerization. I interviewed their export manager a while back, and shortly after the interview, he ended up having to leave that job because the cans that he was exporting ended up getting rusty because they sat out in the rain. Now, containerization can save you a real world of hurt because the goods always stay in the container. In other words, when they leave your warehouse, they're in a container until they reach the buyer. So there's a lot to be said for containerization in terms of protecting the product, not only from the element, but protecting it from the possibility of theft. Another important trend is that towards intermodalism, which is using the same container on various forms of transportation. So if you look at the container in front of you, you can see that it could be utilized on a ship or by rail. And this is very important because even our port, the Port of Long Beach, is moving more towards the direction of doing more with rail. So locally intermodalism will be extremely important. One term that you should know is TEU, which is 20-foot equivalent unit. And the container that you see in front of you is 40 feet in length. So this would be the equivalent of 2 TEUs. And in fact, 40-foot containers are the most common. Now, most retail that moves through the Long Beach, LA ports does move in containers, but there is also liquid bulk, dry bulk, break bulk, and roll-on, roll-off cargo. If you don't have enough cargo to fill a container, you might consider LTL, or less than container load. And this is when you combine your cargo with another company's to fill the container and get better rates than using the whole container yourself. You could do this with a company that you are familiar with, or you could have a freight forwarder help you with this. And in fact, freight forwarders are extremely helpful and extremely knowledgeable on a number of areas in terms of exporting. Your chapter talks about some of that. In the next video, we will hear from David Jordan of Roanoke about some of the things to think about when exporting and the importance of shipping insurance. Air cargo is also an option if you have relatively light cargo. As your chapter discusses, there are two types of air cargo. There's the lower deck containers and, of course, the air cargo pallet. An extremely important topic is Incoterms. The Incoterms, developed by the International Chamber of Commerce, are a set of definitions on when control and responsibility passes from the seller to the buyer. And I like this graphic because it depicts very well moving from red to blue so that you can see when the buyer has responsibilities and when those pass to the seller. So case in point, if we look at Ex Works in red, this is where the buyer has the most responsibilities. I mean, essentially, they're picking up the product from the seller's dock. The opposite of that, at the very bottom, is DDP, or Delivered Duty Paid. in which the seller has the most responsibility. And you can see there are variations in between in terms of who has responsibility for what. As you'll see in the next video, the Incoterms are extremely important, not only for who has responsibility for the possibility of loss, but who's responsible for providing insurance, etc. Our virtual speaker, David Jordan, will talk a little bit about various Incoterms.